System defenses. What I am referring to when I say system defenses, that's where your opponent has a playbook where it can be more advantageous to pick a man defender based on position rather than whether or not there's a good player there, right? Like a lot of what we've talked about is so far is like, well, Fred Young is awesome and you can use him here, but you can't use him here, right? If you employ a system defense, it doesn't really matter who's in that spot because the spot is really powerful against that playbook because it's left unblocked, right? Just how the playbook is blocked, there's someone who's always free to defend the run, which allows you to pretty much call nothing but pass, and it can make it very difficult to sustain long drives when you're on offense. So we're going to start with, and some of this may be common knowledge to people in the Tecmo Bowl League because it comes up. This is something that can be true in Draft League. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about doesn't apply to Draft League because the rosters are different. But some of this stuff does apply, right? So we're going to start with San Francisco. San Fran only has one run. It's a run to the bottom. So that means that your top defensive end, linebacker, and safety are all going to be unblocked, right? And so that's the system versus San Fran, right? Man, one of those spots. Now, due to the speed that's on the San Fran offense, it definitely helps to have a good player in those spots. So, New York, Denver to an extent, Cleveland, Chicago, they're comparatively strong. Washington and Minnesota are too, honestly. They have good players up top. But, they have their own issues that we'll be getting into in just a moment. But that's the move against San Fran. Also, if you call pass one, it's going to put that bottom outside linebacker in computer coverage on Jerry Rice on the other two pass plays. You still have to contend with Roger Craig underneath, and that can be a lot to handle. But that's the system for San Fran. Of course, LA, the system there is that there's never anyone blocking the top outside linebacker, right? Which makes New York, like the hardest counter possible in the game, right? And I beat Mort, the great Mort, by calling Washington LA in the semifinals of, I think it was 2019, right? So Washington has a quality top outside linebacker. Now, obviously, most teams don't have a good player in that spot, and it's not a lot of fun to have to try and defend Bo Jackson with a crummy outside linebacker. But it's not as difficult as you think it is. The idea is you really need to make the LA offense grind because that's not what it wants to do. LA is designed to tear off big chunks of yards all at once, and by calling a ton of pass, specifically a lot of pass one, and limiting how many yards, trying not to get beat too bad in the run game, which can be easier said than done. You want LA to have to run a bunch of plays and wind up in a bad situation where you nail them on a few play picks and then they have to punt, right? So top outside linebacker is the system versus LA. For Miami, on their run play, everybody is blocked except the outside linebackers, right? It's the only play like it in the whole game. I prefer to man the top outside linebacker because your bottom outside linebacker is in coverage in certain situations, and your top guy really isn't. So you can defend the Miami run and never really have to worry about calling it just by being the top outside linebacker. I would suggest that when you call pass one, you switch to either the top defensive end or top inside linebacker, depending on whether you got a 4-3 or a 3-4. That's a pass one call because in those circumstances, he is unblocked on the run, and Lorenzo Hampton pretty much runs straight into him. You can snuff it out really quick, even with kind of a crappy player in that spot. So the outside linebackers are the key versus Miami. Finally, we've got the sad bastards, Washington and Minnesota. Against Washington, the top outside linebacker is never blocked, just like LA. And against Minnesota, it's the bottom safety, right? So the fact that there's always potentially a man defender who is unblocked no matter what, plus the fact that both these teams have really crappy running backs, make it difficult to sustain long drives and score with these teams, right? Like, it's so tempting to try and employ the Washington defense in a tournament because they're so deep. Charles Mann is so helpful. Dexter Manley is an elite defender. Wilbur Marshall is useful against multiple teams. And they've got fast wide receivers. You want to play with Washington. You really got to work hard to get him in there. I just can't think of a use case for Minnesota. If they had just a mediocre running back, I'd say, give him a shot. But Darren Nelson is one of the worst in the whole game. He's slow. He doesn't have Kevin Mack's power. And so it's hard for me to, other than like a Washington-Minnesota matchup, I just can't really envision myself ever calling them in a tournament. But anyway, the system versus Washington, top outside linebacker, Minnesota, it's the bottom safety. So it's my hope that some of the stuff we talked about here tonight, some of you who are watching this may already be familiar with some or all of this stuff. I just have found it helpful to be thinking about this kind of stuff. I hadn't thought about it in a long time. With the tournament coming up in August, it's time to start getting familiar with these teams, start thinking about matchups that you want to call.